There's Slammer banging his egg. Now, don't think that we spent time training this. This is a completely hardwired behaviour. In fact, when there's no egg, Slammer's been known to throw his rock at absolutely anything he can find.
You know, 8 years ago, I didn't know anything about animal training, but I really like dogs, so I thought I'd get myself one to train for competition. His name is Russell, and he is a boxer. Now, if I'd had the mindset to listen to those that had gone before me and knew just a little more about training, I probably would never have gotten a boxer to train for competition. Ranked at about 48 out of the 79 breeds listed for obedience and working intelligence, many experienced trainers did suggest a more trainable breed, and as an inexperienced trainer, I often felt that I had bitten off just slightly more than I can chew. But I kind of liked their goofy face, so somehow my mind was set. If pet dog owners seem quick to compare the mental capabilities of their animals, professional trainers aren't far behind them. Those of us lucky enough to train animals for a living have a wonderful job, but we also have a very definite hierarchy that we match the animals we are working to. Dolphins, elephants and parrots are said to be very quick to catch on, while cats, cows and owls, well, they might get there eventually. In fact, whether trainer or not, most human beings seem quite obsessed with the notion of animal intelligence. Everyone knows that apes are the smartest, followed by dogs, who are much more intelligent than cats, with sheep, chickens and fish bringing up the rear. As trainers, our ranking is based specifically on the animal's trainability, how quickly it can catch on to the behaviours that we are trying to condition and place under stimulus control. And while it is certainly true that animals definitely do vary in their ability to learn what we are teaching, it might just be that the yardstick we are holding them to is measuring just a little more than brain power. Back in the early 1900s, when scientists first began to look at learning in a systematic way, a great deal of emphasis was actually placed on the insignificance of species differences when it came to learning. As prominence was placed on the various laws that were coming from the laboratory, it was vastly held that any animal could learn any behaviour they were physically capable of performing as long as the laws of operant conditioning were precisely met. Then in the early 1960s, doubts actually began to arise to this idea. Two of B.F. Skinner's students, Marion and Keller Breland, had begun to use Skinner's findings outside of the lab, setting up shop training animals for fairs, television commercials, zoos, museums and fun parks. They were in fact the very first to do so. Now, while their success with thousands of different species speaks volumes, a number of apparent failures actually began to appear. And in their 1961 paper called The Misbehaviour of Organisms, Keller and Marion described some of the trouble that they were having for the first time. Pigs that had been shaped with food to pick up tokens and deposit them into a piggy bank for a television commercial began to drop and root at these tokens and became slower and slower in completing the task. Chickens that simply could not be trained to do the simplest of things, to stand still. Despite the very best training efforts, the animal's behaviour consistently prevented the animal from gaining reinforcement, and thus it seems to break the very laws of learning on which the training was based. Either these animals were really dumb, or something else was going on. You know, it's interesting because something else actually had occurred. What had happened was a conflict between the behaviour that was being trained and an instinctive behaviour of that animal. You see, when the training had involved the use of food reinforcement, these animals, and quite a few others like them, they began to drift away from the trained behaviour, or the one that they were learning, towards the innate behaviour that was naturally linked with gaining food. Pigs quite naturally root the earth to unearth their favoured fare, and chickens instinctively scratch around in the dirt searching for the smallest of morsels. Because these behaviours are so closely linked to naturally gaining food, the food reinforcement and the whole training scenario actually began to trigger these innate behaviours in the animals, which was quite often nothing like the behaviour that was being trained. When this conflict occurs, we can see behaviour that, in the absence of a sound knowledge of the animal's natural behaviour, can quite frankly make the animal seem pretty dumb. During training sessions, it's really easy to forget that behaviour doesn't occur in a vacuum. What the Brelands remind us is that the animals we have in front of us bring to the training game a vast array of behaviours that have been shaped by nature and the process of evolution. This inheritance influences not only how they are likely to respond to certain stimuli, but it can also affect their actual capacity for learning types of associations between their behaviour and the environment around them. Well, over the past 50 years, we have learnt a huge amount about the behaviour of animals, and we now realise that species must obviously differ in their capabilities to react to certain stimuli, because each species has evolved to fill a unique niche in the world. It would really make no sense for it to be otherwise. A general label like intelligent doesn't acknowledge this and thus is quite inappropriate, especially when we define it in respect to human qualities. For an animal to be intelligent, it must simply be capable of making the associations that help it to survive. And if an animal has trouble making certain connections within the confines of our training program, doesn't mean the animal is stupid. It may simply be that the sorts of associations we are asking of it were simply not required of it naturally. As trainers, it is good for us to remember that every animal possesses the necessary tools they need to survive in the place where they naturally find themselves in the world. Come on, Gil! So if it's not the animal's intelligence, what is it that makes one so much more trainable than the next? When we compare those species which are considered intelligent, we actually begin to see a bit of a pattern emerging. Animals that have evolved to fit into a quite varied world often are easier to train because they naturally have to make more types of connections than an animal whose immediate environment is less flexible. For instance, if you need to find numerous types of food in numerous types of places while getting along with others of your own kind, the ability to be flexible and generalise will be a huge advantage. On the other hand, a rigid niche in the world doesn't make such requirements of its inhabitants. It demands specialisation, specific behaviours that must be perfected to the letter. Some animals simply don't need to develop the ability to bend and change with the times. They simply need to do what they have always done with the smallest amount of effort and energy. Very smart indeed. At the bird show, we have the opportunity to work with some of the most inflexible and also some of the most flexible animals on the planet. While parrots naturally live in social situations and spend a lot of their time searching for various forms of food, birds of prey have evolved as hunters that live predominantly solitary lives. As you would expect, their learning capabilities vary enormously. Now, while all of our birds have been relatively similar in their ability to learn A to B flights just from one trainer to another for food reinforcement, the typical behavioural repertoire of a performing parrot is completely lost to a bird of prey. You know, coming from a background in dog training and only having ever experienced one species, I was convinced that the laws of learning were universal and that they affected all animals equally. But it was during the process of trying to train a crested hawk named Simon to put his wings out on cue that I realised that this was not the case. A parrot that has a bit of history in learning will actually catch on to this behaviour very quickly. Our long-billed Corella Jacob learnt it very easily in just 3 short sessions of a few minutes. We showed him the sunflower seeds which were just out of his reach and bridged him the moment he stretched his wings out to fly. Easy. We used the same method on Simon, and while the majority of the time we seemed to make progress within the session, at the start of the next we'd be right back where we started, and he would continue to jump on the food as soon as he saw it. After a month, Simon was still none the wiser. I guess jumping on food as soon as you see it is a very smart behaviour when you're a bird of prey. When we look at the animals in our care predominantly via the notion of intelligence, we do them all a great injustice. When we point the finger via subjective labels like intelligent, stupid, stubborn, or anything else you might like to pull out of your hat, we do nothing for our animals or for ourselves as trainers. When we take the time to really understand our animals on their terms, we gain a lot of power to influence their behaviour. and by utilising our understanding of operant conditioning and our ability to skillfully apply this knowledge into our training sessions in a way that supports their natural tendencies, every animal has the chance to shine. You know, if the notion of intelligence has anything to do with training, I think the focus really needs to be placed on us as trainers. So next time someone asks you which animal is the smartest, tell them they all are.
Now the world don't move to the beat of just one drum. What might be right for you may not be right for some.